Windsor City Council has reaffirmed its Housing Accelerator Fund submission in hopes to access $40 to $70 million in federal funding. That submission prioritizes fourplex-by-right zoning in certain wards and neighborhoods and along some transit corridors, but it's potentially already risked and jeopardized at the outset of this affirmation of it because the federal government has said they need fourplex-by-right zoning throughout the entire city. Joining me to discuss right now is Ward 2 Councillor Fabio Costante. How you doing?
Good, John. How are you?
Doing really well. Appreciate your time on this one. Really important stuff here. So you were one of three councillors who voted against reaffirming this submission, voting along with Ward 9 Councillor Kieran McKenzie and Ward 3 Councillor Ronaldo Agostino. Why'd you vote the way you did?
Yeah, so we're in the midst of a housing crisis. I don't think anyone would disagree that that's the case, and I saw this as an opportunity to materially address housing, affordable housing, and homelessness in our community. As I stated in my debate, and look, I always respect the decisions and the will of council. But to reiterate my points and my summation in the debate and why I voted the way that I did, simply put, the evidence before us did not conclude in any way, shape, or form that approving fourplexes as of right would damage neighborhoods, would deteriorate quality of life, would depreciate house values. There was no shred of evidence to suggest any of that. And in fact, the limited evidence that we had was that, and a lot of folks don't know this, but right now in our community, and this was passed by the provincial government 2 years ago, roughly, you can build 3 units as of right anywhere, mostly anywhere in the city. And so since that legislation has changed, we've seen 26 applications go through in year 1 and another 26 applications go through in year 2. We have 80,000 homes in the city of Windsor. So to give you, perspective, but even more so, those 26 applications we learned from administration are actually concentrated in neighborhoods that already have mixed use housing. So neighborhoods that already have these duplexes and triplexes and fourplexes, because that's where the demand is. That's where the demand is for this type of housing. So a lot of the fear that was out there and the speculation and the concern, while I never want to delegitimize it or dismiss it in any way, wasn't rooted in any evidence. And the limited evidence that we had actually spoke to a different story. So that was a source of frustration, and that was one reason why I voted the way that I did. But John, there's another side to this story, and I wish we had more time that led up to the council decision, so that folks like housing providers and those experiencing challenges in accessing affordable housing could have been heard, because I think their voices would have been important in this process. And that is the 6,000 to 7,000 plus individuals on the affordable housing waitlist. We've seen homelessness rates higher than we've ever seen before. There are people living in precarious housing situations more than ever before, where you've got 10 to 15 tenants living in a single detached family home. And so we are growing at rates that we've never seen, and that's not going to stop. And so the way we do housing in our community has to change from the way that we did it years prior. And the way we look at building our city has to change from the ways that we did years prior, because we are a city that's going through a transformational change and a transformational growth period. And so those were some of the reasons. That there were some others that I said, we've got to move forward with this. There's 28 other municipalities that have signed on, John. I'm not aware at this date of any others that did not meet the requirements, aside from us. And frankly, I don't think we've received any formal notice or letter from the minister at this point, but I know that there's 28 municipalities that have been so far approved. And so, when we think about, okay, well, what's the difference between 3 units as of right versus 4 units as of right? And my answer to that is upwards of 40 to 70 million, and that's really, what we left what we could be leaving on the table. And those are the reasons why I voted the way that I did. There's also ways in which we can do housing to leverage some of those funds as well. And we've heard from some experts in the last few days on how they view that pot of money, that it's not just $40 million, let's say, but it's what that $40 million can do to leverage even more housing build. So again, we're in the midst of a housing crisis. I think this is a decision that could have materially addressed a big part of our housing crisis. And for all those reasons, and there were some others, I decided to not support the motion that was on the table.
Well, thank you so much for that answer there. Of course, I mean, it's incredibly complex. There's so many moving parts that are in this file, but the base is that, we need more housing, and this was money that was able to help unlock that. The federal government and the city of Windsor are now on as opposite ends of the spectrum as you can be on this file, with the feds saying, you've got to do this, you got to jump X high to get the money, and the city saying, well, no, we want to jump Y high. Do you think that there's any chance that the feds budge on this and decide to provide this money to the city? Or do you think that there's a risk that they're going to look at this as, if we give it to you, every other municipality, and maybe municipalities that we've already given money to before, are going to come to us and demand changes or more?
Yeah, so I don't have that line of sight to know, and I always remain hopeful, irrespective of how the decision went down at council. I mean, I want what's best for our city, and I don't care where I fall on the debate, so long as we get the investments that we need to move our city forward. But what I heard loud and clear, not just from the minister, but from our own administration, that the minimum ticket to entry was 4 units as of right across the city. And that's never changed. So if the messaging ever changed at any point, it certainly could have influenced our debates, or certainly could have influenced, discussions around the table, but that's never changed. And it hasn't even after the debate. So I don't know where things are at behind the scenes. I'm always hopeful, John, but we had the opportunity to control our destiny on Monday, and the decision, was one that put the ball back in the minister's court, if you will.
Well, we will, wait and see what that response is from the minister's office. I'm not all that optimistic about it, but hey, I'm not an elected official, so I don't have to, do the diplomatic speak that sometimes you guys have to do. But I like the cautious optimism there. But let's shift the conversation to those dollars and cents. 40 to 70 million dollars, most likely 40, we can just agree on that, is a lot of money. And Windsor has a lot of infrastructure needs that are coming up. And I've just been doing some back of the napkin math. Mega hospital at around $250 million needed for the area. Sandwich South, $400 million. A bus garage mahal at $300 million. And then just on Monday at council, at the 2024 budget, you guys were talking about like 300 or so capital priority projects that need to be done. For example, I'm thinking Victoria and University, reimagining of that street. Projects that need to get done, but specifically said, well, we haven't funded these projects either in 3, 5, or 10 years, I believe is what it was. So that was another $350 million. My point being is, you add those up, and of course, that's not all encompassing in terms of what the city needs to get done in terms of all of our master plans and all of the spends. That's $1.5 billion just right there alone. So while 40 million is a drop in a bucket of $1.5 billion, it's still 40 million. Can we actually afford to be saying no to federal dollars at this point?
Well, when it comes to massive infrastructure projects, whether it be, DMAF, so, sewer infrastructure, as, in the context of record rainfalls that are happening more and more frequently, and protecting individuals and residents who, in their basements and basement flooding and all of that, or housing in this context. We always knew, and we always will know, that the municipality cannot solve those issues alone. We cannot do it without support from federal and provincial government, because we just simply don't have the funds. For every dollar that a taxpayer pays, we get anywhere between 8 to 12 cents. The municipality does. So we don't have all the money to solve all these problems. And so I would submit that if we're going to tackle these really big issues, that we're going to need that kind of support, upper level government support. And this was one example. That $40 million is an example of how we can materially address housing. And remember, how we leverage that money too, especially when it comes to housing, because it's a model that kind of pays for itself if it's done properly. is, could have greatly assisted in the development of more affordable housing units in our city. Any city, of any size, but especially mid to large size cities, are going to have complex challenges and issues, and will never be run exactly perfect. 100 years ago, I'm sure there were folks that were upset about the way the city was looking, and 100 years from now, I'm sure there's going to be different types of challenges that folks are going to be upset about, or that are lagging in some respect. And so, with that in mind, we've got to look at, what are our priorities? What are the core functions of a city? What are the core components that, we're responsible and tasked to do, based on, legislative requirements, but also based on what we're hearing from our residents and our constituents and from the community at large. And things like housing, and the infrastructure that you mentioned, are very core components of building a city. And so, whenever we can receive assistance from upper level governments to help invest in these core city functions, we should really take that as seriously as possible, and work toward receiving those funds.
All that I can do in the role that I have is just, look at the stories, analyze them all, and then try and synthesize some kind of a through line from it all. And the one thing, if I was writing a column about this right now, it would be, and I get that, funding from upper levels of government, there's so many different pockets, but at the end of the day, there's really only one pocket of the taxpayer, and it's all taxpayer dollars. I'm reminded of this big fight the city has right now with the feds over the Ambassador Bridge blockade and the reimbursement over that $900,000 for legal fees, even though they've already picked up $6.1 million. And it just, we're fighting over $900,000 on one hand, and we're giving up $40 million on the other hand. And I just got to imagine, if you're up in Ottawa right now and the name Windsor shows up, it's just like, God damn it. I mean, no, we're not having this conversation right now.
Well, I hope not. I hope that's not the sentiment out in Ottawa. But look, you always want to have really good relationships with provincial and federal government, because you rely on them for quite a bit. And again, they have resources that we just do not have. I'll always go to, I may have quoted this with you, John, before. I know I have, certainly in council debates, but the late mayor of Mississauga, Hazel McCallion, who would say, the feds, they have all the money, the province has all the power, but the municipalities have all the problems. And so for us to address a lot of the issues that we're facing, and we're on the ground, so we hear these things every single day. And so for us to address these things, we can't do it without partners. And it's vitally important that those relationships are harnessed and maintained, and that we can leverage them as best as possible.
Well, we'll leave it there. I want to thank you for your time today, Councillor.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it, man.